Hello and welcome. We're beginning a day, or I should say continuing today, in James chapter 5 as we've been going through the book of James in our daily devotionals. And today we want to start in a new topic, which is, I would essentially summarize it as the prayer of faith. In other words, the verses that we look at over the next week will kind of fall under this whole issue of praying and praying with faith. Now, some people assume that if you pray at all, you have faith, and we all understand that there are many prayers that are offered that have absolutely nothing to do with faith. I mean, I think about sometimes prayers that are offered at civic events or at athletic events and different places where people give up and give a prayer. You know, they open Congress and the Senate with prayer every session. And many times those prayers are really rote and very liturgical, and you're left with a very clear sense that it's more of a short religious speech than it is actually a prayer. The prayer of faith really implies the idea that when I'm praying, I'm doing it not only because I have faith in God, but I have the kind of faith that says that unless God does the thing, nothing good is going to happen. I mean, something might happen, but nothing good. And we find that in the New Testament that when Jesus talked about faith, particularly when he noted the kind of faith that people had, that he divided those faith into two kinds, two categories. There was great faith, we might call it mega faith, quite literally, and then there was little faith. Puny faith, tiny faith. And it's ironic that the only times that Jesus ever said somebody had great faith was when he was speaking to the Roman centurion in Capernaum and when he was speaking to the Syrophoenician, or literally Canaanite woman. Yes, Canaanite, like the Old Testament Canaanite, the Canaanite woman living up in what's today modern day Lebanon in the city of Tyre or Sidon. I can't remember exactly which one it was. But the whole point is this, that these were non-believers in the sense they were considered to be unclean Gentile people in the minds of the Jews of that time. And yet they related to Jesus in such a way in their requests that he said their faith was great. And secondly, that he'd never seen that kind of faith in his disciples or with Israel in general. And why was that? Well, if you look at the case of the centurion, he comes to Jesus and Jesus agrees to go to his house to pray for his servant that's dying. And the man says, "Oh, you don't need to do that." He says, "I understand authority. I give a command, my soldiers carry out my command." And he says, so all you have to do is give the command. In other words, I understand that you have the power of God. You can speak a thing and you can change the circumstance. You can alter reality into something that's more conformable to my desires. You can do that because you're the God-man. And Jesus looked at him and said, I haven't seen that kind of faith in Israel. The same way with the Syrophoenician woman, where she's pleading with Jesus to cast the demons that are tormenting her daughter, to cast them out. And Jesus said it's not appropriate to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. That may sound really a very pejorative kind of way of talking to this woman, but the reality is that that's the way the Jews viewed the Canaanites, as if they had the same status as Canaanites. They weren't really fully human in the sense that they considered themselves to be. And the woman responds by saying, yeah, but even the puppies will eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And again, Jesus said, I haven't seen such great faith in Israel. In contrast, when he talked about the faith of his disciples in particular, these men who had lived with him, and they'd eaten with him, they slept with him, they traveled with him, they had this day-to-day encounter, they'd seen the miracles and the wonders, he said of them that they had little faith time and time again. And it's not that they had no capacity for faith, because every one of us has a massive capacity for faith. We do things all the time with uncertainty, but we trust that it'll work out. We get in our cars and we drive on the highway, we climb on planes, and we're trusting that we'll be safe. I mean, we climb into an aluminum tube that's going to fly at 500 or 600 miles an hour, made of millions of different parts that have been put together by the lowest bidder. And we have faith and confidence that we'll take off and land safely and get to our destination. That is an exercise of faith, because there's no certainty or no guarantee that that actually would happen. We're essentially gambling with our lives. We're looking at the odds and we're gambling that we'll be safe. Well, I don't mean to frighten you from flying the airways, but the whole point is that faith is something we have a great deal of, but what we struggle with is really using it or placing it in God himself. And his disciples showed over and over again when they were on the sea, when there were storms, when Peter was sinking in the waves, when there was not enough food to feed the multitudes. They illustrated over and over again that they really didn't recognize that Jesus had control over everything. Not only people, but the elements. And that's why he said, you have such little faith because you've been given so many opportunities to believe, but you choose not to believe. And I think that's something that's really important for us to kind of get our minds around as well, that God has given you all the faith you need. It's just a matter of, are you willing to entrust him with your faith? Are you really willing to place it within him? Faith is kind of like a treasure that God has given to us. And he says, I want you to take that treasure and entrust it in me. So obedience in the Christian life is really the entrusting of the treasure of faith into the hands of God, that my treasure, my faith is safer in his hands than it is in my own. Now, I've talked to many people over the years who said, well, I put my faith in this pastor or this church or this ministry or whatever, and they disappointed me. And my response is really simple. Of course, you got just what you deserved. You were looking at that man, you were looking at that church, you were looking at that ministry or whatever, and they are made of flesh and blood. You were trusting them, not trusting in God who is greater. And I know that may sound kind of harsh because I know those kind of experiences are painfully disillusioning. And believe me, I've experienced them myself. I'm not speaking out of school here. But the simple fact is I've always had to pull back and say, wait a minute, regardless of that, God has never been unfaithful. He's always proven himself to be trustworthy. And so as we talk about the dynamics of faith this week, I want you to really begin to think about how are you exercising your faith? Do you see the faith that you possess as being a possession, a treasure that God has given you, that capacity to trust yourself to someone or something? And are you willing to entrust yourself to God completely and fully? Are you absolutely surrendered in yourself and your identity and your dreams and your goals? Because that's the kind of faith that God finds pleasure in. That's the kind of faith that God rewards and blesses. And unfortunately, many of us are holding very tightly, or we're just really eking out little measures of faith, kind of $1 at a time to see what happens. And as a result, we wonder why we have a low investment of our lives in the things of God, and then we get a low return, a low reward. And when that happens, it tends to cause us to become less willing to trust God. We become more reluctant because we're saying, well, I trusted you a little bit and you didn't reward me greatly. No, great faith is what brings about the results that are great blessings. And this is going to be a challenge. I hope that this week we'll begin to really kind of press you a little bit in regards to these things. But we're going to pick up tomorrow. We're going to be beginning by reading in verse 12 again, which I haven't even gotten to yet. You might want to read ahead and think about it, and you might be asking the question, well, how does this passage relate to the issue of the prayer of faith? We'll try to answer that for you tomorrow. God bless and go in his grace.